For I equal to the square root of -1, what is 1 plus 3i quantity squared? Let's go. Let's start by remembering something really important here. I, which is defined for us, is the square root of -1. What does that mean? Well, remember how you never used to be able to take square roots of negative numbers? If I asked you to take the square root of -9, you wouldn't be able to do it because we can't find a number times itself that gives me -9. But what I is an imaginary number that creates a whole new system of numbers called the imaginary numbers or the complex numbers, which are actually super important in lots of high levels of math. So like physics and chemistry and engineering, there's all sorts of applications where I is so super useful. But in our case, we got to remember that I is the square root of -1. And the important consequence of that when you're doing algebra problems is if I is equal to the square root of -1, then when I square both sides of this equation, I would have I squared on the left side. That's fairly obvious. But I squared means I would square the square root, which cancels the square root, which leaves -1 behind. So I is the square root of -1, and that means that I squared is just -1. That'll be really important in a moment, because our job here is to square this quantity, which means we're going to have to FOIL it out, which means we're going to end up seeing some I squareds in there. Let me show you what I mean. We've got 1 plus 3i squared, which means I have to do 1 plus 3i times 1 plus 3i. Now, real quick note, if you just tried to square the 1 and square the 3i without doing FOIL, you're going to get yourself in trouble, so don't do that. We've got to FOIL this out. Remember, FOIL stands for first, outer, inner, last. The first term is 1 times 1, which is just 1. The outer terms would be the 1 times the positive 3i, which is positive 3i. Okay, there's the O. The I in FOIL means the inner terms. So that would be the positive 3i times this positive 1, which is another plus 3i. And then the L in FOIL stands for last. I'm going to multiply the last term times the last term. So that would be 3i times 3i, which is 9, because 3 times 3. And then I squared, because there's those two i's that we're multiplying. Okay, so we've got 1 plus 3i plus 3i plus 9i squared, and we haven't yet simplified this. With problems involving I, there's a lot of the normal algebra rules that you've been learning that apply. So like in our case, we've got to combine like terms here. 3i plus 3i is 6i for those middle two terms. I've still got this 1 over here, and then I've got this 9i squared. Now this is where we were saying before, when I see I squared, I know I can replace I squared by -1. So this 9i squared could really be thought of as 9 times -1. And that's important because I squared should never show up in the final answer of a problem that you're doing, because I squared could always be rewritten as -1. So this is really 1 plus 6i plus 9 times -1, or in other words, 1 plus 6i minus 9. And if I do the 1 minus the 9, those are my like terms here. 1 minus 9 is -8 for those two terms, and I've still got that 6i hanging out there after the fact. So my final answer simplifies down to -8 plus 6i. And if I look carefully through my answers, we'll see that A is our answer. And if you got that, great thinking.